I left Idaho Falls at 6:15 in the morning because I wanted to be on the trail with the first clean light. The drive to Swan Valley was empty and quiet the whole way down US 26. The river off to my right, pale and flat under a thin band of fog that hadn't burned off yet. I picked Palisades Creek because it's straightforward. Follow the water up to the lower lake. Keep going if you feel good. Turn around before dark. I've hiked it a few times and always told myself I'd finally push past the lower lake and see the upper. I had a Dayak with the basics: headlamp, filter, a space blanket, a cheap compass, a paper map that showed the general basin, plenty of calories, a first aid pouch, bear spray clipped to the shoulder strap. I signed the trail register at the kiosk, wrote my plate number on a scrap of paper, and tucked it under the windshield wiper like I always do when I am solo. The air smelled like wet wood and cold granite. It was late September. Aspen along the creek were already turning, coins of yellow against the darker fir on the slopes. The first couple miles are easy. The path is wide, loping alongside Palisades Creek, the water pushing fast over bedrock and fallen limbs. Loud enough you have to raise your voice if you're close to someone. I passed a dad with 2 kids in hoodies and a woman in waders working a run below an old log jam. There's a spot where the canyon narrows and the trail is shaved into the wall with a decent drop on your left and the creek chewing away below. Everyone gives each other space there without talking about it. Past that it opens and you can walk without thinking. I kept a comfortable pace, breathing easy. My plan was simple. Lower lake by late morning. Snack. Check the time, see what the sky looked like, and decide if I would go farther. I always tell myself I don't have anything to prove, but I also don't like turning around when I still feel strong. By 10:30, I hit the outlet of Lower Palisades Lake. The water was low enough to show a collar of gray rock all the way around, a little wind rippling from west to east. The tents were tucked in the trees near a flat meadow, and I could smell someone's coffee. A guy in a faded ball cap and a woman in a puffy jacket were packing up. We traded a hello. He said they'd heard something circling the camp the previous night. Probably a deer, maybe a black bear. Didn't see anything, just footsteps in the brush. He grinned when he said it, but he kept glancing at the timber like the joke didn't sit right with him. I laughed it off, wished them a good hike out, and walked along the north shore on a narrower path that stayed above the water line. Past the far end, you pick up the main tread again as it funnels into the upper canyon. There were bits of orange flagging tied to willows along the way. Not Forest Service standard, just loose knots on thin branches. Outfitters do that. Sometimes volunteers do it when the brush gets bad. The tape looked fresh, edges still crisp, not frayed by wind. I noticed it in that way. You notice something that may matter later, but doesn't mean anything yet. The trail steepened after a tributary and a stretch of slick angled rock where the creek crowding the trail forced me to step carefully on wet black stone. When that ended, the canyon relaxed again, and the trees got taller, the shade heavier. I didn't see anyone else after the couple at the lake. No bird song for a long stretch either, which isn't strange in the middle of the day, but felt noticeable because the creek noise softened there and left a quiet that made every shuffle of my shoes sound too loud. Just before noon, I reached a fork that isn't on the printed map I brought. The main trail went straight, climbing into timber. The other was narrower, dropping left toward a shallow side drainage before curling up again. Someone had tied neural-looking blue flagging on that smaller trail, a single ribbon that snapped in the breeze. In the hard dirt at the junction, I could see the round prints of horses. They came from the way I'd come and turned up the smaller trail, fresh enough that the edges of the prints hadn't rounded off yet. I crouched and touched one out of habit, feeling the soft crumble. Pack strings go to the upper basin late season. I figured there might be a faster line that cut some switchbacks. I took the left without thinking very hard because it looked traveled and my legs felt good. The cutoff walked clean and then, after 5 or 6 minutes, thinned a softer tread through tall grass. More blue tape. but now it was tied low at knee height as if someone had been walking and fastening it without pausing. A single strand here, another there, little flashes of color in green shadow. It was the kind you can buy at a hardware store. No writing on it, no bent staples, no printed FS. The upper canyon opened into a shallow bench with meadow grass and old stumps where trees had fallen years before. The tape led me across at a slight diagonal and then into a patch of younger firs where the ground turned to needles. That's where I stopped. Not because I was tired, but because I felt all at once, aware of every inch of skin on my back, the way you do when someone steps into a room behind you and doesn't talk. I turned slowly. Nothing. Grass bending in the breeze to my right. The edge of the meadow behind me, shadows in the trees ahead. The quiet pressed hard enough that I found myself holding my breath to listen. The creek was distant now, a muffled hiss like a road heard through a window. I told myself I was being jumpy. I looked down to make sure the last ribbon was still in view. It was tied to a sapling, to twists and a knot. I moved forward. The trees closed a little. Another ribbon on the left, then one low on the right, almost hidden. My calves prickled again, and I told my legs to keep going because stopping was worse. What I heard first were running steps in the brush somewhere behind and uphill. Not heavy, not deer, 2 or 3 quick footfalls. Then nothing. I stood still again, longer this time, turning until I had a full circle of stillness around me, doing the slow scan hunters do, looking for a curve that shouldn't be there, or a straight line in all the chaos. Nothing. When I started walking again, I did it as quietly as I could, rolling my feet instead of slapping the ground, trying not to let a branch flick back and make noise. It's hard to move that way with a pack, even a small one. It throws your balance a little. 30 feet later, I heard the footsteps again. Same cadence, same distance. As if whatever was moving had matched my pace and only broke silence when I did. There's a point where you drop the polite explanations. You go from probably a deer to something is following me. I didn't call out. I didn't want to tell it anything about me, even the sound of my voice. I pushed on, cutting between 2 firs and stepping over an old log gone to red sponge inside. When my foot pressed into it, the wood gave way, and the smell of rot and cold sap came up sweet and sharp. I watched my feet again. The ground ahead was churned and soft. Hoof prints. Yes, but wrong somehow. Broad and round like they should be. But the spacing was off, too tight for a horse. The prints doubled back on themselves in tight loops, maybe stock-tied here in pacing. I kept moving, and the blue tape led me past the worn place and deeper into the trees. The next ribbon was different. The tail of it had an extra twist like someone had tied it and then changed their mind about where to put the knot and fumbled a second time. It hung too low, brushing my thigh as I passed, and I flinched harder than that small touch deserved. The feeling of eyes on the back of my neck had turned to a weight. I couldn't shake the sense that if I looked at the exact right spot, at the exact right second, I would catch something standing too still. I stopped again and listened for my breathing to quiet. The steps came again. 3 quick touches through brush and then silence. Closer. I didn't think. I spun and blew bear spray in a hard orange fan into the trees. The propellant boomed in the still air, and the mist hung and drifted in droplets that caught tiny flashes of light. What answered was a sound I have not heard before or since and have no good word for. It was like hearing an animal cough and a person clear their throat at the same time, except the person part was wrong, like someone trying to make the shape of a human sound without knowing how. The brush shuddered. I saw nothing move except the fog of spray thinning between trunks. Sap dripped from a wounded spot on a nearby tree where something had rad bark off in parallel grooves, long and neat. I backed away from it and almost stepped off a small ledge because the ground dropped where an old root had lifted and left a shallow trench. I caught myself and cursed it out loud, a short ugly word that made the silence heavier the way dropping a rock into a still pond shows you how still it was. I wandered out of the trees and into open where I could see. The blue tape pointed left toward more timber, but a line of light showed through the right-hand side. I pushed through and came into a wet flat place fed by a trickle from a spring. The mud took my shoe a half-inch deep and held it. A dozen hoof prints pulled with water here. More loops and figure eight south and stops and starts as if an animal had circled the same patch for a long time with no destination in mind. In the center of those prints was a single bar of a footprint that did not belong there, and I still see it when I close my eyes. It wasn't a full print. It was the impression of a pad and the suggestion of toes, but the length was wrong for any bare human foot, and the angle was wrong, too. Set as if whatever put it there had leaned heavily on the outside edge. I knew then I had taken a line I shouldn't have. I looked back into the trees, and there, for 1 second only, I saw something pale where pale didn't belong. Not white like bone or the inside of bark, not animal, not clothing. A face or the idea of one at torso height behind a screen of young branches half turned and low as if it had been crouching and lifting at the same time. The mouth, if that's what it was, didn't move. The branches whispered as the light shifted. When I blinked, it was gone. I didn't spray again. I stepped backward out of the wet spot, careful not to slide. Every hair on my arms was standing. My body had decided for me. I was going back the way I came. I turned, found the last ribbon, and headed toward it at a pace that was too fast to be quiet and too slow to call a run. The ribbons that had led me in didn't lead me out. I don't know if I missed one or if there wasn't one to miss. I hit a pocket of trees where I expected to see a tail of blue and found nothing. I turned twice, 3 times, and nothing looked exactly like it had. Though that's what heavy timber does when you're rattled. Every tree is a copy of the last. I took a line that felt right, following the slight downhill that should aim me toward the creek. The steps in the brush to my right kept pace, showing up every 30 or 40 feet like a presence in a mirror you won't look at. The spell broke when a voice called my name from somewhere ahead. Caleb. It was my name, and it came through the trees with the soft edges you get under canopy. Not loud, but clear enough that it reached me clean. I've been on this earth long enough to know how my own name sounds when someone says it. I heard it, and every part of me braced, because whoever said it shouldn't have known it. I hadn't seen anyone since the couple at the lake, and I hadn't told them who I was. I hadn't called anything out. I'd written C. Martin in the register and left a plate number, but those were back at the trailhead. There was a reasonable line of thought where you say a hunter could have seen me and read the name stitched above the chest pocket of a shirt and used it, but my shirt didn't have a name. And whoever said it like they didn't understand the shape of the word, like their tongue was too big, like someone pronouncing letters they'd only seen on a page. I took a step backward. The voice came again, closer, the exact same tone and rhythm, the exact same length between syllables, like a recording. Every instinct I have told me to get into open ground. I turned toward the downhill again and pushed hard until I found the edge of the bench and the slope broke and I could see a gray slide of talus with the dark stripe of the creek and trees below. It wasn't near. A long way down through brush and broken ground and rock and the kind of blowdown that eats an hour 100 yards at a time. I didn't have a choice. I didn't want to stay in that timber with a voice that could say my name the same wrong way twice. I started down and learned fast that the slope had little shelves and drops. I tried to pick the cleanest line. The thing in the brush came too. Slower when I was slow, faster when I was fast. I slipped once and caught myself on a young aspen that bent and slapped back and hit me in the face as it righted, popping me across the lip hard enough to taste iron. I spit and kept moving. The trees thinned a little and I could see the creek better now, slick and slate and fast through boulders that looked like wet backs. The light had gone gray without a cloud in the sky. That happens in canyons when your angle to the sun changes and the walls steal the light. I checked my watch for no good reason. 158. I wanted to know where the sun would be. At 6 o'clock. At 7. I didn't like those numbers. Halfway down, the slope broke clean into a jumble of charred logs laid like jack straws. There must have been a lightning strike here years ago. Thick black bolts fallen every which way. The bark bubbled and cracked and frozen mid-blister. I had to go over, around, under, picking a route where an awkward misstep could break an ankle and keep me there overnight. That's when I heard the voice again, only it wasn't my name. It was my voice, and it said, "Hold up." From 10 feet to my right, where a black stump went to cinders. I don't talk to myself when I'm alone. I don't announce what I'm doing. I don't narrate my day. I heard my voice say those 2 words, and I didn't look. I pushed between 2 logs that pinched the pack hard enough to wedge me, and I ripped free like an animal in a snare, hearing fabric tear. And I took the slope in the clumsy, fast way you do when speed is the only thing you have going for you. Behind me, something climbed over the same logs I had just gone through. The cadence of steps rose into a short run and then stopped again when I did, like it didn't want to be heard, except when it chose to be. I hit the creek lower down than I'd aimed for. It wasn't a lazy braid here. It was a boulder garden with slick cobbles between. The water, even in September, was cold enough to knife my shins numb the second I stepped in. I picked a line across because the opposite bank looked flatter and more open. It's stupid to trust open ground in a canyon like that, but the trees on my side pressed hard against the slope, and I wanted space. Halfway across, with water swirling at my knees, my pole jammed between 2 stones, and my wrist strap held me to it, and I had to wrench hard to pull free, and I almost sat down in the current. When I reached the far side, not thinking, I stepped out onto a slick rock and went to one knee, and my hand landed in something that wasn't mud. I looked down and saw my palm had pressed into a smear that looked like rust. A handprint laid there before me, the stain thin and even and somehow not dried. I pulled my hand away fast and wiped it on the grass. The smell that came up wasn't rot or iron. It smelled like wet dog and hot hair. I had in the open, the blue tape hung on a willow. There was no reason for it to be there. I had broken off the cut, gotten lost, dropped to the creek, crossed where there was no trail, and here was another ribbon with the same fresh square edges and the same knot. It moved in the minor breeze that always runs along water and pointed upstream like a finger. I stood still and watched it and counted my breaths out of some need to make the moment into a fixed object. 1 to 3 for somewhere behind me and across the creek. A twig popped once, and then the same pop sounded behind my left shoulder without the footsteps to carry it there. I didn't follow the tape. I found the most obvious line of human foot tread and stayed with that instead. Even when it peeled away from the creek and cut back toward thicker trees, the light degraded in the canyon faster than it should have for the hour. And when I checked time again, it was 3:39 and the sky above the walls had gone the color of a bruise. There's a subtle point in a day hike where I am making good time becomes, I have to keep this up to be okay. I made myself eat then even though my throat had gone dry because calories change how you think. Chewed slowly, drank, swallowed, drank again. A guy alone in timber crossing through hours where he doesn't want to be anymore is a different kind of animal than the guy who walked in. That's just a fact. The human trail I found was human in the sense that people had passed there, but it wasn't good. Deadfall had piled where winners had laid trees across the path, and no one had cut them out. Dame's slide marks showed where things smaller than me had gone under. A stretch of old switchback had slumped where the hill had let go like a bad tooth. At a flattening, I came across a pile of stones built up about knee-high. 5 of them stacked carefully in a column, a paddle of bleached bone laid on top. The bone was too flat and broad for a deer. It was from a cow or an elk. It had a notch worked into the narrow end, not a break, but a tidy little cut, and black hair hung from the notch like someone had threaded it through and tied it off. I didn't touch it. I stepped around, giving it more space than it needed. The steps in the brush returned, not close, but always where the sound took advantage of the wind. Sometimes upwind, so I caught scent with it. Wet hair, dirt, the sour tang of something that had slept in the same patches of grass until the grass took the smell. Once on a short rise, I heard a branch creak in a tree and the sound of weight shifting and a soft rasp on bark as if something was hanging where it didn't belong and making small adjustments it couldn't help but make. I let the bear spray hang in my hand and walked with it in front of me like a bad talisman. Sunset came early because the canyon took it. The trees flattened the light until my eyes wanted to make shapes out of every shadow. I stopped and pulled out my headlamp, checked battery, clicked it off. I didn't want to shine it yet. A light draws attention, and I already had enough of that. At the next bend, the trail started a steady climb. I recognized none of it. The map folded in my pocket was a useless sketch for the level of detail I wanted. My phone had no service. The little compass on my sternum strap told me west was behind my right shoulder, which fit the shape of the canyon. But the way the trail switchbacked and the way the creek meandered made direction into a joke. The only numbers that mattered were the ones on my watch. For 5:85 to 7:05 for 9, when the dark fully set, it was like putting a lid on a pot. Heat left the air and I felt the switch on my skin. I clicked my headlamp on low, and the beam made a tight tunnel ahead. The world outside that tunnel was murk and suggestion, and things just beyond its edge looked like they were moving, even when they weren't. Bugs came to the light. My breath became a white line that curved away on the exhale and folded away out of the beam. I stayed on the footing I could feel through my shoes as much as see. The footsteps in the brush stopped. In their place came the soft tearing sound of something moving through grass behind and above, and then exactly in front of me, half revealed in my light, a man stepped onto the path from the right and raised his hand in a lazy wave. That is what my eyes told me before the rest caught up. The shape had the size and the outline of a man. It wore a brown jacket that could have been canvas or hide and hung wrong on the frame beneath. The wave was slow and late, like a signal arriving through a long wire. The face was facing me, but it wasn't looking at me. The alignment was off, as if it hadn't solved where I should land. The headlamp painted its front flat. I did not think. I put my thumb down on the bear spray before my brain could say the word spray, and the orange cone blew across its chest and face and beyond, filling the space between us with a fog I could smell as it drifted back toward me. The thing made no human sound at first. It simply went down in a folding way like joints had been put together for a different purpose and then asked to do this. It hit the ground on a hand and the back of one elbow, pushed and slid back and away across needles so quickly and so fluidly that the distance between us doubled in a breath without the normal steps that belong in a movement like that. The jacket had no zipper and no buttons. It was a single piece. As it moved, it turned into brush and then into darkness, and the only sound it made then was the new noise of something breathing with the wrong rhythm. I never truly ran before that night. I jogged and sprinted and done all the normal human speeds because of sports or the fun of it. Running in the dark on a narrow path with a pack on while you don't know where your next foot is going is not like those things. It's a controlled fall, a series of fractions of an inch where luck holds you up. I did it because standing there and thinking about what I'd seen was not an option. The trail pitched up, then down, then into a shallow saddle that held cold air like a bowl and a smell of water nearby. Somewhere in that black timber, I heard it call out again with my voice, a single, "Hey," followed by another that sounded like a man trying to speak while his mouth was full of cotton. The second one went wrong at the end and made a click I felt more than heard. I blew through a stand of aspen where the trunk stood white and clean and the bark took the headlamp in a way that made them look like cut poles. On the far side, the soil turned sandy and then soft, and I sank ankle deep into a cold marsh. Winter dark grass hid the water. I stepped and pulled and stepped and pulled and made myself not look back, because I didn't want to see it standing there at the edge, watching me shoulder through the slow part. When I hit firmer ground again, I stumbled into an opening where a ruined cabin lay collapsed in a low heap. 3 walls sunk to knee height, one still upright and holding the shape of a window. Everything was gray. The window opening showed a strip of stars and a wedge of hill. Inside the remaining wall, someone had built a circle of stones and burned a fire recently enough that when I put my hand above where coals would have been, the air captured there by rock was warmer than the rest. Beside the circle, someone had arranged 3 pieces of wood leaning against each other into a tidy little tripod, and a string of black hair was wrapped around one leg of it. The knot was clean, like the one in the bone groove. Beyond the far wall of the ruin, I heard the sound of something stepping around a rock and then stepping around it again. I put my back to the upright wall and brought the spray up, and I held it there until my arm shook from the effort of not letting it fall. I don't know how long I stood like that. The watch said 6:22 when I checked, then 711 the next time. Between those numbers, the air thinned and thickened in my ears with my pulse, and at one point, a coyote called on the ridge above, and 3 seconds later, the same call came from 50 feet to my left, without the kind of echo a canyon makes. I kept telling myself to move, but feet root when they want to. I finally made myself leave when a small stone trotted across the packed dirt just inside the wall and came to rest against my boot. I hadn't heard it fall. I hadn't seen it come in. It had been thrown or rolled with purpose. I took one step, then another, and when I reached the edge of the ruin, I saw movement inside the square of the window. 2 hands gripped the sill from the outside, fingers spilled, nails dark, wrists thin. They held there a long second and then released and slid down the outside wall with a dry whisper. I went north because north was downhill there, and downhill meant water, and water meant the creek, and the creek meant the main trail somewhere. The path I was on, if it was a path, thinned to game runs and disappeared into small flats where the ground did what ground does in mountains. It looked promising and then tricked you into thinking lines that weren't there continued. The headlamp was to bright and to narrow all at once, picking out details and lying about context. I kept it on low and covered it with my hand when I could, letting light leak through my fingers so I could see where to put my feet, but not advertise. The trees pressed in, the sound of the creek grew louder and then disappeared when a stand of fir blocked the line of noise and then came back again, closer. I stopped twice to listen and found listening worse than moving because the moment I held still, the sounds crept in. I came to the water by accident. The ground simply ended and the beam hit the slick slope of a boulder. And beyond that, black and moving, was the creek. I didn't want to cross again in the dark. I didn't want to stay on that side either. I looked downstream and saw a log spanning a narrow place, thin and worn and gray with stripped bark and the look of something that had been there too long. I didn't trust it. I put my foot up anyway because standing there felt like waiting. The log dipped under my weight and the creek threw foam sideways where it struck a rock. I shuffled one foot and then the other, the way you do when you know the worst thing you can do is rush. 3 steps in, the log twitched as if something touched it from below. My stomach went cold and tight. I went to a knee, grabbed with my left hand for balance, and something on the downstream bank laughed once, short and perfect in my own laugh. And then the sound dragged like a tape. I got off that log any way I could and went downstream on my side, scraping knees and shins and cutting the side of my hand on stone when I slipped again. 10 yards later, I found a set of rocks I could hop between and did it badly, almost sitting down in the water again, cursing out loud like a man who thinks volume equals control. On the far bank, the ground rose in a slope of small trash rocks and then settled into larger ones that held the slope in place. I climbed into the trees and the hill eased, and there, like a stupid miracle, was a piece of cut log with the end chopped square, laid across a muddy patch, the center worn from boots. Human, maintained by somebody. I followed the wear until it showed me a path that had been walked enough times to keep brush from closing it. The first sign I was truly back on a real trail was a sawn cut in a down tree where someone had bucked a section out and rolled it down slope. I put my hand on that bright sawwood and felt how smooth it was and told myself I was going the right way. The second sign was a little blaze scar on a tree, the rectangle of old cut and new growth framing it. The third sign was a smell I didn't know I'd been missing until it hit me. The faint sour of animal that isn't wild. The mix of leather and salt and horse, so light I thought I de-imagined it until the trail cut onto a small shelf and I saw hoof prints stamped deep in the dust, wet at the bottom like they'd been made recently enough that water from the animal still fell in after it pulled away. I rounded a bend and headlamps hit me in the face. To bright circles at chest height and a voice said, "Whoa there." Real and wrong in the way all voices were wrong by then. Too human to trust. I stopped and lifted my free hand and dropped the bear spray hand to my thigh. Two riders sat there on calm big hipped horses, mules behind them on short leads, pack swaying. The front horse stamped once and shook a fly off, steel shank and leather rigging jingling. "You're out late," the lead rider said. He was an older man with a brimmed hat pulled low and a face that didn't give much away. Beside him, the other rider, younger, kept his light on me like he was trying to decide if I'd scare his animals. I got turned around, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to somebody else. "You on the Palisades Trail?" "Yes, headed out." "Yes." He looked past me over my shoulder into the dark I had come from, and I turned despite myself. Nothing moved there. Nothing sounded. The younger rider cleared his throat, and the sound of it was ordinary and miraculous in a way that felt stupid to think. "We heard something dogging us up higher," he said. Figured it was a cat at first. "Didn't commit. Stayed in the dark timber. Been a quiet night for talking." He said the last part like he regretted saying it out loud. The older man clicked his tongue and moved his horse forward and off to the side so I could slide past. "You can walk behind me," he said. "You can talk if you want or you don't have to." We're headed down. We walked like that for a long time, the horse feet placing carefully, the mules stepping where the horses stepped. The sound of their breath steady and calming in a way that almost put me to sleep as I walked. The men didn't ask questions, and I didn't tell them anything. Once above us on a slanted face of broken rock, something dislodged a stone, and it skittered until it hit and bounced and skipped again. And every animal in the line paused and lifted their heads and stared, ears forward, and we all waited while dust drifted down, and the sound bellied into the dark and died. "Keep moving," the older man said to the string, and we did. Lower near where the canyon widens, and the creek splits around islands of gravel you can walk on in July, we passed a sign I recognized and then a turn I knew, and things I had seen in daylight came back in the beam and turned into landmarks I could trust. The air warmed, the smell of cold rock went away. At a bend far ahead, I saw the glow a parking area makes when someone pulls in with headlights and then turns them off. And the interior lights stay on as they dig for something. The men told me their names then, too fast and soft for me to hold, and I told them mine. And they tipped their chins like they'd known it already, and it didn't mean much to them. I thanked them once, and then felt like I should do it again, and the older man said, "You're out. That's what matters," without turning. At the trailhead, the vault toilet and the beer board and the feed post all stood in their right places like actors at ease. A truck idled. A woman sat on the open tailgate eating something wrapped in foil, her head lamp on red and her hands moving carefully. She looked at me and then looked away in a way that meant she'd learned to give strangers space in the night and held to the rule. I walked to my car and put my palm against the hood for no good reason and felt that it was cold metal and not a living thing. My windshield wiper still held the scrap of paper with my plate written on it. I could see my name in the trail register under a piece of plexiglass, my scribble crooked where I'd leaned the pen wrong. Before I opened the door, the coyote called again. This time it came from down canyon, not up. The notes were right at first, 3 rising to falling, the same clean sound the ridge dogs make at dusk, and then it broke and stumbled, and somebody who had never made the noise tried to fix it on the fly and got it wrong. It turned into the beginning of a laugh and stopped short like a person who'd been told to be quiet at the last second. I got in the car and shut the door, and the thunk of it closing took the air out of my chest and gave it back. I turned the key and the engine caught on the second try, and I pulled the seat belt across my shoulder like an old habit. In the rear view, I saw 2 points of light moving down the trail. The riders had lamps as they brought the string in. And for a second, I imagined one more light following them, lower than it should be, steady as breathing. The fear that lifted the hair on my arms then was the same as the fear that started in the summer when the blue ribbon brushed my leg. It was not any bigger. It was the same animal math. I put the car in gear and rolled out slow over potholes, tires finding the shallow places, the creak still loud even here. At the highway, I didn't look left toward the reservoir. I looked right toward home, and I turned that way. And I drove until the canyon fell behind, and the road straightened, and the lights of Swan Valley laid out simple and human under their own small sky. I won't go back up that trail. We went out to the swell because it was the shoulder season and because I said we could squeeze one more trip in before the nights locked up. Everyone else we knew was already talking skis and Thanksgiving travel, but the forecast for the San Rafael was still showing highs in the 50s and lows just below freezing, and the cottonwoods along the washes would be yellow. I had a route in mind that wasn't technical, Temple Mountain Road to a spur, then a few miles on foot along a shallow drainage west of Tomic where the slick rock lifts into benches and the juniper gets stunted and twisted by the wind. The plan was simple, for days, for nights, a loop that would keep us within a day of the truck at all times. It was me, my cousin Nate, and his friend Mara, who had only camped in Utah once before, but was fit and game and had borrowed a good bag and pad. We left Green River early with 10 gallons of water distributed between the bed and the cab, a stack of wood for the first night, and enough calories to be bored of tortillas by the second. No permit issues out there, just BLM land and the usual common sense. Don't crush the crypto, pack out your trash. Keep your fire small and in an existing ring. We stopped at the Goblin Valley turnoff to air down the tires a little and drove until the washboard fizzed in the steering wheel. Cell service died before the reef rose to the west in that wrinkled line it always makes you feel small against. Our first camp wasn't far from the truck by design. We pulled off on a faint tow track that paralleled a sandy wash and walked our gear in 200 yards to a patch of hard pan already scarred by old tent prints and a blackened ring. They were the usual signs people leave, foil torn from a freeze-dried pouch flattened under a boot print. A bit of cord somebody had snipped and thrown down a rubber band. Nothing fresh. The air smelled like sun-warmed stone and juniper pitch, and the breeze had a dry edge like it was coming off snow somewhere high. We set the tents with the doors facing east so the sun would hit them in the morning, rolled the little boulders we could find into a decent fire ring, and made a first dinner that always tastes better than it should just because you're out there. Coyotes kicked off about the time the sky lost its color. Their sound has a way of carrying across the flats, so you can't tell how far they are, and a pack can sound like they're in every direction at once. We sat around our small fire and traded the first night stories that people always tell. Nate talked about a cougar he thought he saw in Capitol Reef one winter that turned out to be a German Shepherd. I told the one about a falling star over the Henry S. that burned green and broke into 3 pieces. Mara had a story about getting turned around in Foggy Bottom in DC and ending up on the wrong metro platform for an hour. No one said anything heavy. It was just the first night and the sound of the coyotes threaded under everything until we zipped the tents. Some nights in the desert feel empty and clean and you sleep like you shut a door on the world. That first one wasn't like that. I woke around what felt like to a sound I know too well out there. Small rocks sticking against other rocks. Like something has stepped where people have piled the flat pieces into little cannons. It's not uncommon. Rabbits do it. Foxes do it. But it had a rhythm that felt like a footfall instead of a skitter. I listened to it come up out of the wash and then stop short of camp, maybe 15 yards off. The juniper shadows were black holes between the paler slick rock shoulders. I was on my side, with my bag zipped almost all the way up, and I stared at the tent ceiling where my breath had left a faint frost. When I sat up, The lycra of the sleeping pad cover squeaked, and the sound outside cut off like somebody had turned down a radio. Then something exhaled once. Just one slow breath, and I could hear coyotes again way off to the south. I thought about unzipping, shining my headlamp saying something, but I stayed quiet, counting out 200 beats, and then another 200 until I slept again. In the morning, we found prints, not paw prints. On the damp sand at the wash edge, we saw our 3 boot patterns. My left Vibram lugs wider at the heel, Nate's narrower and deeper where he stomps, and Miraz's new sole is still showing the manufacturer's little X's. Cutting across them were flat ovals that didn't belong to us. Toe impressions so shallow we couldn't name them, and a heel that was just a smooth dent. Barefoot. The stride wasn't big, mid-feet to knee height between steps, and the line of them drifted in and out of the sandy parts and then ghosted over slick rock where we lost them completely. You can convince yourself of a lot with partial prints. We poked around, backtracked half the camp's perimeter, and found 2 more impressions in a patch of dust behind a juniper, like someone had stood there a long time and shifted their weight once. I didn't like it. Coyotes leave delicate paws. People leave flat plains and wait. We didn't say what we were all thinking, just that someone must have walked through recently. The air had a metallic taste. When the wind swung north, we decided to move camp up the drainage. It was the plan anyway, and we didn't talk about moving because of the prints. We broke down, smothered, and stirred the coals until they were cold, and brushed out what trace we had made the best we could without trampling the crust. On the way toward the head of the drainage, we passed the stub of a mine adit cut into the slope like somebody took a bite out of the hill decades ago. They were old timbers and rusted cable and a piece of sheet metal half buried that might have been an oil pan. The junipers grew stockier there, guarding pockets of shade where the ground stayed cool enough that the soil never completely dried. We stayed on slick rock benches as much as possible. By midday, it warmed to the point where I took off my fleece and tied it to the top of my pack, and the wind slid down off the reef like a hand on the back of your neck. We kept seeing old sign boot prints that the wind had softened and rounded the rim print from a 5-gallon bucket that had made a perfect circle in a place where somebody must have siphoned water from a pothole. No more bare feet. Second camp sat on a shelf above a bend in the wash where cottonwood grew and made its own season with its color. It was bright and loud against the sandstone in the pale sky. We found a rock alcove that would block wind, and we set our tents under its lip like teeth. I gathered dead juniper, the good kind that breaks with that dry snap and burns hot, and stacked it in a cradle of larger sticks to get a coal bed. We ate early so we wouldn't burn headlamps making dinner. The coyotes did their thing right on time and then went quiet. Mara pulled her beanie down over her ears and said sometimes she forgets the desert isn't the beach, that everything is sharp and louder than you expect at night. And even the silence shows up with weight. We sat a little closer to the fire that night because the cold settled faster and there was a feeling of attention around us, which is the only way I can say it. The wash curve made a natural amphitheater, and sound came back to us off the walls in a way that made you second-guess the direction. After we had checked the guidelines and crawled into the tents, I lay there and watched my breath again until it thinned. Out in the wash, a voice said my name. It said it wrong. It was my name flattened and pitched like somebody had heard me say it once a single time from too far away and then tried it out of the dark. Evan, it said, but the E was crushed. So it sounded like it came from down in the wash, not up the slope where our fire had been. I pushed my face to the mesh and saw nothing but the power of the rock. If I had been alone, I might have curled into my bag until morning and told myself it was just the weird way sound carries. But Miraz's zipper slid halfway down and stopped, and she hissed a question without using our names. Then from the other side, the voice that had tried mine tried Nate's and got it even worse. Broke it into clean syllables like a student reading off a roll sheet. Nah, T. The wash amplified it. I didn't say anything. I reached for my headlamp, thumbed it without clicking it on, and lifted the zipper to teeth at a time. When the flap cracked open just enough, I took the light in my palm and did a low sweep. You can see 20 yards like that without wrecking your night vision. The beam hit the cottonwood trunk, a dark stripe like a river in the bark where the sap had run. And in the next sweep, it caught the points that reflected and then dropped. Some animals' eyes throw back silver. What I saw was duller, more yellow and weak, and set too far apart for anything I could name. I lifted the lamp again, and whatever had been there had moved, not away, but lower, like it had folded down. A rock skipped once in the wash, then twice. After that, nothing spoke. We lay there listening to all the small sounds we had decided not to hear, and slept in fits again. In the morning, the prints were closer. We found them coming up out of the wash on a diagonal that would have taken the walker straight past our tents if we hadn't been where we were. The line bent just shy of where our shadow spread from the alcove and skirted the edge, then dropped back down into the sand. We paced it out. The stride hadn't changed. The feet were still bare. In one place, a heel had pushed deep and brought up wet sand like the water table was surprised by weight. And then, this bothered me more than I can explain. We found an extra mark next to one of the prints that looked like the edge of a hand where someone had set it down flat to steady themselves. It didn't show all the fingers, just the heel of the palm and something that could have been a little finger and ring finger blurred together. For a second, I told myself it could have been a raven wingtip. It wasn't. We stood there and ran out of ordinary explanations in a quiet way. And no one said the word that sits at the edge of Utah stories out there. The one people laugh at until they don't. We hiked a loop that day to move and to make daylight do some work for us. The sky stayed a high, thin blue, and the breeze never quit. The swell bends light in a way that makes distances slippery, and it's easy to think a promontory a 10-minute walk when it lives an hour away. We climbed to a saddle where the slick rock tilted up and broke, and from there we could see north toward the reef like a scaly back, and the Henrys farther snow set into their gullies like chalk lines. On a patch of clay that hadn't fully dried since the last storm, something had pressed in a knuckle line that made no sense if you were looking for hooves or paws. It was wrong as soon as I saw it. We walked more quietly after that. In a shallow alcove, we found a dead rabbit hung through the tendons of its back legs on a little fork of juniper. That happens. People trap and tie off their catches. Coyotes stash things, but the cut was a jag of stone, not a blade. And the trail of blood below went 3 feet and stopped like somebody had been careful. On the way back, we stayed on the high benches and watched our own camp from a rise for a while before we went down to it because I didn't want to walk into anything I didn't have to. That night, we did a fire, not for warmth, though it helped, but for the way fire gives you something to look at so you're not staring out into the negative spaces waiting for them to fill. We agreed to a watch without making it official. I said I'd take first, then Mara. Nate said he'd go last because he claimed he could fall asleep anywhere and wake up fast. The wind dropped sometime after midnight, and the silence went hard. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Coyote sparked up again far away and then shut down, and that's when something clicked its teeth behind the alcove wall. Not a chitter, not a scrape. Teeth. It went once, twice, like a dog giving the barest warning. And I got up as quietly as I could and walked to the edge of the alcove and stepped around it with the headlamp off. The stars were strong enough that the slick rock showed pale. When I thumbed the light, the beam washed over a patch of ground that looked like it had been brushed with something damp. I scanned. In the near distance between 2 squat junipers, I saw the silhouette of somebody standing with their shoulders hunched up high and their head pushed forward. You know how a person's posture tells you they're cold or hurt or about to move. This posture told me nothing except that it wasn't right. The light hit the plane of its chest and slid off because something dark covered it that drank the light. A hide, I thought without wanting to think it. The head, if it was a human head, was covered, too, bearing long strings that could have been hair or strips. It didn't flinch or throw up a hand. It didn't turn. It just dipped slowly, Like whatever was inside that shape was deciding whether it could fold itself to the ground without breaking. I took one step back, which made a scrape, and the figure smoothed down out of sight like a person lying into a bed very carefully. I held the light there until my hand shook, and there was nothing left to show but pale rock and black juniper trunks and a smear of shadow that wouldn't resolve. I went back to the fire and woke Mara with a hand on her shoulder. I told her to listen. We didn't say the word. We just used our eyes until we could see the perimeter as a line we were willing to defend without drawing anything to us by name. We made the decision to move early on day 3. We didn't pack immediately because running doesn't make sense if you can't outrun the ground, and out there the ground goes on. But we loaded bear cans and stoves and anything that clinked it into our packs and rolled the tents, and we shouldered everything and went southeast toward a spur that would bring us down near an old mining track. It wasn't the direction we had planned, it was the direction that put us nearer to the truck. And at that point, the plan wasn't worth much because the situation had changed from a nice loop to not wanting to be where we were after dark. Our path traced a slot's upper lip for a while, and the drop on our right kept my eyes honest. On a flat between two shallow domes of slick rock, we found a structure that I have no better word for than arranged. Broken twigs of black brush laid in a shape you could talk yourself into seeing as a body, to branches for legs, to 4 arms, and a shorter piece for the head. People do that. Kids do that. But the ends of the branches were singed like they'd been passed through a flame, and there was no ash station anywhere nearby to explain it. Nate kicked the shape apart hard, made a mess of it like he was stamping out a nest of ants, and I was glad he did because it broke the spell of seeing it. We didn't take a long break or sit for snacks. We ate walking and didn't talk about anything other than water and distance, and whether the cloud bank building over the reef meant the forecast had been wrong. We dropped into the next drainage slower than we needed to because of the way the bentonite clay looked. When it's dry, it's just dirt. When it's damp, it turns into grease that will laugh at your boots and send you down on your hips so fast you won't know you fell. At the bottom, the cottonwoods grew thicker, and we found a series of prints we all agreed were from a person in trail runners, not boots. They were older than ours, shallow and wind-sanded. I wanted them to make sense of the other prints and erase them. They didn't. The bare feet we had seen before weren't there. What was there instead were scuff spots at the base of cottonwoods where something had knelt and then stood and then knelt again, near where a bit of matted hair had snagged on a twig. The hair was not ours. It had a smell like wet iron and old dog. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't. Mara was quiet in a way I couldn't argue with. And when we climbed the far side and looked back, the lines our bodies made in the October light felt too sharp and obvious on the stone. I kept thinking about our names pulled wrong in the dark and how sound had come from the place where water flows when it exists and not from the hard wall where it would carry better. Little things like that put a hook in you. Our third camp, because we had to stop somewhere and there wasn't enough day left to reach the truck unless we wanted a night walk along a tow track with light obvious from a mile away. Sat in a cup of sandstone with a big sky above it and good angles of firelight to make shadows stay where they belonged. We built the fire early and big enough to matter, then kicked it down to coals and fed it steadily instead of letting it flare and die. We set a real watch this time and said it like orders so the words would make us follow through. I took first again. I didn't sit. I stood and walked slow circles for an hour and a half. Coyotes barked once and then were gone. The wind ran a hand across the tent flies and took it away again. My lamp stayed off because I wanted my eyes full dark. When the hour turned, I shook Nate's boot and he rolled and sat up and took my place. I went into the tent and lay on my side again and listened. I must have slept because I woke to the sound of someone easing my tent zipper down tooth by tooth as if they were counting. I lifted myself on an elbow and put the fingers against the zipper track without making it obvious, and the pressure on the other side stilled like the person doing it was listening for me, too. It reversed then, tooth by tooth, patient, precise, and when it closed, It clicked the metal pull against the stop softly, like a person done doing something well. My mouth filled with a sour taste. I did not say anything. I didn't switch on the lamp. When the world outside moved again, it moved to Nate's tent. I heard his hand find the handle first, heard the thump as he grabbed the zipper pull, and jerked it up fast. And then I heard the sound of something scrambling in sand without claws. He came out with the lamp on and did a full sweep like a lighthouse, hard and bright and unafraid. And I hate that beam, because you can only see what it shows. But I loved it then, because it took whatever was close and pushed it back. In the near distance, the light caught something hunched behind a juniper that uncoiled up and up until it was taller than it should have been. And then it dropped to all fours and went sideways in a way no deer goes, and no dog does either. It had a strip of something over its shoulders that shivered as it moved. Nate said a word I won't put here, because it makes me feel like I am dragging something back to us. And he threw a rock with his offhand like a bad idea. It hit a trunk and bounced and caught a whine from whatever was there that wasn't an animal and wasn't not one. After that, it kept its distance. And by morning, there were tracks around our tents in a deliberate double circle, like someone had paced off a perimeter we hadn't set. At dawn, we made coffee like it mattered, because it did. The sun came on slow and pale, and the ice we had made in our bottles melted away from the plastic and curls. We found on top of one of our beer cans something that made me sit down on the nearest rock. Someone had braided 3 pieces of yucca fiber together badly unevenly and pushed a single long human hair through the braid. The hair was lighter than ours and longer than Marat's, and the end had a slick to it like it had been covered in something then dried. A joke is a thing with a direction and a goal, and even a malicious one has a kind of grin on it. This wasn't a joke. It was an object made by hands in the dark that wanted us to know the hands could do it. I took it and put it under a rock and then changed my mind and burned it in the last of the coals and stirred the ash like I was burying something that could still breathe. No one had slept. We didn't need to say that out loud. I said what we all wanted to say without using the exact word for it. That somebody out there had a problem with us being where we were and that we needed to be done. We're out. I said we're going straight for the road and we're not stopping to take pretty pictures. The day we left did not make itself easy. The sky kept getting brighter, and then not like the sun was rubbing its eyes behind high, thin clouds. We stayed on hard stone and the spines of ridges because the sand sucks you down and the clay will take your legs out if the wind brings you any damp at all. We made time, we lost time, in one place. The wash cut down suddenly and offered a choice between a sketchy slab and a slide into a cold pool. We slithered and then made jokes with voices that sounded like we were reading lines. The strange thing was so often, we'd come to a place where our own tracks from 2 days ago appeared like a message we had left ourselves. They were not alone. The barefooted prints had stepped inside the edges of ours in 2 long runs where the sand held shape, heel over heel, toe over toe. The weight set deliberately on top of our weight as if to show how completely we were inside, whatever game this was. I tried to imagine a person doing that at night without leaving extra marks, without a headlamp, without a stumble. I failed and I have a good imagination for ordinary things. At a bend in the wash where the sand was clean and windswept, something had written an arc of parallel lines with the tip of a stick. The lines were in clusters, 2 lines, then 3, then 5, then 3 again. I wanted it to be nothing. I wanted it to be wind. It wasn't. The stick lay at the end of the lines with its tip dark. We walked around it wide. We saw the truck's track before we saw the truck. The faint tow track had been our guide in, and when the drainage we followed intersected it at a shallow angle, I felt relief in my shoulders like I had been wearing somebody else's pack the whole time. We climbed the last little rise, and the Tacoma showed its tan shell and its black tires with a dust crust that I knew like a friend. I have never liked the way trucks look in wild places, like a wrong-colored animal that wandered in. But I loved it then, like a house on fire loves a door. The driver's door was closed. The bed was as we left it. The gasket had a new scuff near the handle that I couldn't swear wasn't there before. I hit the fob and the lights blinked. We started tossing packs into the bed without any of the usual order. I went to grab the last water jug from the shade of a boulder where we'd cached it and found the cap off and sat beside it on the rock like someone had poured, and then remembered to replace the cap but put it down instead. A little circle of dark damp had dried around the mouth. I don't know why that detail made me angrier than any of the rest. Maybe because it meant hands, and hands mean a person, and that made me want to understand, and understanding was the one thing that wasn't going to help. We decided to camp the last night near the truck and leave in the morning light. It was the wrong decision, and I own it. It was late afternoon, and the road out has washouts and a couple of spots where you want a little light to place a tire. We told ourselves we were being smart and safe and not rattled. We picked a flat 15 yards from the truck on ground that had been used 100 times, and built a fire in a ring made by people who had done the same thing we were doing and had not had whatever we had for company. The sky cleared completely, and the temperature dropped hard the way it does in October when the heat just leaves the air like it found a door. We ate quickly and didn't pretend to be hungry. We did our watch again, and I took first, and for a little while I believed we were going to win just by staying put and not giving it anything to push against. The desert can be like that. You can outlast it by recognizing you are small and making that work for you. Then the wind shifted and the smell came. I've smelled dead things in the desert. You come across a cow sometimes, or a deer, and there is a sweetness that rides above the rot like sugar dissolved in bad water. This wasn't that. This had the iron of blood and the musk of a dog that hasn't been washed, and something earthy like a wet hide pulled out of storage. It came up slope against the wind, which is not how smell should work, and it arrived with a silence that felt like the world had been turned down a notch so that whatever wanted to make a sound could be the only thing we heard. The coyotes did not sing that night. They left the stage like they were making room. I stood up with my lamp in my hand, but didn't switch it on. I didn't want to give that beam away until I had to. The smell thickened until I could taste it. And then the voice came again from the wrong angle, from the place where the truck sat with its tired plastic smell and its scuffed floor mats and the metal that felt like safety. It said, getting closer to my name. Naughty. There was a new sound in it. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything human. Marat said and got that one wrong too. Pressing the R like it was testing how it felt in a throat. I lit the lamp and swept it hard at the truck. The beam caught the rear quarter panel and lit dust, and then it slid across the tailgate and struck a shape crouched under it that unfolded fast and smooth until it was standing as high as the bed rail and then a little higher. The hide over its head was tight against the skull underneath. Whether that was a skull I recognized or not, and the face under it looked back and didn't shine with eyes, but with a wetness like cartilage. Its limbs were lean and long, and its hands stayed low with the fingers crooked in a way that made them look like they were waiting to touch something without leaving a print. Evan, it said again, better, closer, and I realized with a shock I felt in my spine that it had heard my name the way Mara said it when she was worried. And it was using her tone, and I hated that more than anything. Nate came out of the tent already moving, not running at it, but moving toward the truck like he knew the truck was the one thing that could add certainty to this. Mara was behind him with the keys in her hand. The figure stepped sideways, one foot crossing in front of the other in a pass that was to practice to be an accident, and then it moved with a speed that did not show in any of the motions we had seen before. It went from under the tailgate to 10 feet away from us in a smooth line, and then turned and dropped and ran on all fours without planting the heel of its hands. And if that sounds like I'm making it dramatic, I'm not. That is what it did. I did the thing you do when you have nothing else. I yelled loud and flat to take the human back from it. I yelled Nate's last name like a coach. I yelled, truck. I yelled, now. It was enough to get us into motion that we owned. Nate hit the fob and the lights flashed and the horn gave that thin chirp and the thing did not flinch. It pulled its head to the side in interest like a coyote hearing a new squeak. I love and hate that I noticed that. We ran the 10 yards that felt like 100. The keys didn't fumble. The doors unlocked. We got in. When the interior lights came up, that soft yellow, I almost cried with relief that felt stupid the second it washed through me. The thing came up to the driver's side window and put a hand on the glass. It didn't slap or scratch. It set the heel of its palm there like a person about to knock wood if they were being polite. The glass made a sound, a little croak that windows make when they're pushed, but not cracked. I started the engine, and the truck came to life with a sound I have heard every day for years, and that sound felt like a line thrown to me. I put it in drive and rolled, and the figure moved alongside with 2 steps, and then 3, and then kept pace for 4 like it wanted to see how the game would play if it didn't end yet. Then it peeled off and let us go. And I don't know why, except that sometimes a thing that has had you long enough wants to feel it could still take you if it chose. The 2-track back to Temple Mountain Road is simple in daylight. At night, it has a ribbon with 2 pale rails and a dark ditch on either side that will take you if you look at the wrong thing for too long. I kept my hands light and my eyes up, and I didn't say anything. No one did. We hit the first washout and took it slow, then the second, then the shallow ridge where the wind had draped a little tongue of sand that grabbed the front tires before they found the firmer ground. The truck fishtailed and corrected and then went calm again. In the rear view, in the wash of our own dust, something long and low crossed behind us and then stopped and stood taller, and the brake lights threw it red. And for a second, I saw the hide that had been on its head from the inside, light diffusing through the thin places. I accelerated like a coward, or like a person who wants his people alive, whichever you want to call it. And the truck made the small complaining sounds a Tacoma makes when you ask it to do more than you said you would. We hit Temple Mountain Road, and the surface made a new noise under the tires, more regular, less personal, and the desert opened out in front of us in a way that made me feel like we had stepped out of a room that had no corners and finally found a square to stand in. We drove to UT to 4 without turning our heads. When we hit pavement, the noise of the tires turned to that steady hiss, and it felt like a hand on your shoulder that doesn't belong to anything but physics. We didn't stop at the turnouts where we had stopped on the way in to look for Big Horn on the cliff bands. We didn't stop in Hanksville for gas, even though we should have. We took the road north like it would take care of us, and eventually, the cell phones woke up and made their little noises, and none of those noises meant anything to what we had left behind. We kept checking the mirrors without thinking about it. The first time I looked and didn't see dust or shape or anything. Not us. My chest hurt because I had been holding my breath at some level I couldn't name. The Henry stood black without detail ahead of the sunset, and the world that has lines painted on it accepted us back without comment. We did not file a report with anyone because there is no report for what we would have said. If we had tried, we would have pulled out the wrong words and made them do work they can't. We did the things we could do. We washed the truck even though it was just dust. We put the tents up in a backyard for a night and left the zippers open and closed them and opened them again until that sound felt like ours. We threw away a water jug we didn't have to throw away because the cap had been off. We did not keep the yucca braid because we burned it. We told the same story to each other twice and then stopped telling it because it didn't change and we didn't want it to. I went on a map app and traced the line of the drainage we had followed and put a finger down where I thought the camps had been. And then I deleted the pins because I didn't want them to exist. I've heard that people use the word Skinwalker for a thing in these parts without knowing what they re-saying or who it belongs to. I don't know what word fits what followed us for 4 nights. Learning our names and stepping where we stepped and standing where we slept. I only know we went there as 3 people with a simple plan to stretch a little more fall out of the year, and we came out because the road existed, and that's the only reason. We do go back to that bend in that wash west of Tomic, but we do camp under that alcove again. We do use the little twatrack that leaves Temple Mountain Road and fades past the cottonwood with the dark stripe where the sap ran. There are 1,000 square miles of desert you can love without being greedy. And we can do that now without going to the one spot that let us leave because it chose to. If anyone asks why we changed our fall plan, I say the weather turned on us early and the nights were rough. And that's the truth I'll put on it. The rest is ours. And the three of us agree without needing to say it that there is a place there that knows us by name. And we owe it the courtesy of never hearing ours again.